Previously on Election Rewind.
A new breeze is blowing, and the old bipartisanship must be made new again. Tonight, the battle has been joined.
We got the President of the United States interested in a balanced budget.
Ladies and gentlemen, the state of our union is strong.
Indeed, I did have a relationship with Ms. Lewinsky that was not appropriate.
It is located in Afghanistan and operated by groups affiliated with Osama bin Laden.
Let us lead this nation together.
I will swear to uphold the honor and the integrity of the office to which I have been elected, so help me God.
Episode 2, The Road to the Nomination.
George H.W. Bush and Martin Van Buren were the only two sitting vice presidents to ascend to the presidency by vote.
Fox News politics editor Chris Stirewalt.
Al Gore was even less well-equipped for it than those guys because he didn't know who he was.
When I got out that time, I said I did make that pledge. If I ever run for president again, I'm going to run as an older candidate. And I've kept that pledge.
Carter Eskew was an old friend of Gore's. They had actually worked at the Nashville Tennessean together.
Campaign strategist for Al Gore, Bob Shrum.
And had been in the media business, but had split with his partner. And so there had been a several-year period when he and Gore were not in much contact. I was seeing Gore during that time. He clearly wanted to bring Carter back in. And that's what happened in around June of 1999. Carter and I were at that point partners, and so we assumed that role in the campaign.
At that time, we were in a period of peace, prosperity. The economy was humming along. Confidence in the economy was really high.
National editor of the Cook Political Report, Amy Walter.
You didn't see sort of a schism within the Democratic Party either. Even though there were 8 years of Clintonism, I think at that moment in time, there was a feeling that Democrats were in a great position, despite the fact that, it's really hard for a party that's had the White House for 8 years to go on and win a third term. But given just the fundamentals of the economy and Clinton's job approval rating, it seemed like this was a realistic possibility that Al Gore could, not just that he would win the nomination, but that he'd win the whole thing.
He was the presumptive nominee since he had been vice president, obviously.
Host of Special Report on the Fox News Channel, Bret Baier.
And it kind of cleared the deck a little bit as far as the challenges to Gore.
Here we are in a country where we are disenchanted, angry with HMOs because they're taking away the doctor's decisions in the clinical situation, and we can't even get a patient's Bill of Rights. Here we are at a time where there's the Columbine episode and 13 kids are killed and tragedy strikes again practically every other week. It's all across our television screens. And yet we can't even get common sense gun control.
Well, Bill Bradley was the kind of glistening bauble, the kind of jewel-encrusted candidacy that every cycle draws the attention of the political elite and the media, but fulfill the function of the candidacy that the intellectual elite and the moneyed elite like, but no one else cares about.
In those days, we talked about like the wine track and the beer track of the Democratic Party, but Bill Bradley, to me, fit into the idea of somebody who was coming in as, well, he'd been part of the Washington establishment, the candidate for the thinking Democrat, for the more elite Democrat.
Less than a mile from where I'm standing, not far from the banks of the Mississippi River, there once stood the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company. It was there for 100 years. In its heyday, it employed 4,000 people and turned out thousands of tons of glass. It seemed that just about everybody in town worked for what we called PPG. We didn't grow corn or wheat here in Crystal City. We made glass. Today, I want to be as clear as that glass about who I am and why I'm running for President of the United States. I've come back to my hometown because for me, this is where the world of possibility and hope all began. A world that I want to open for all Americans.
Early on, Bradley was gaining a lot of steam, and he really had some focus pre-New Hampshire. And there was a threat to Gore.
Bradley announced that he was going to run in favor of health care and covering all children on the road to universal coverage, which was actually Gore's position. He was going to run on gun control, which did force Gore, I think, to probably go further on that issue at that point than he wanted. It was clear, for example, when we went to West Virginia that we were in that was a pretty hopeless state for us because of that position. But I didn't think there was a great deal of difference between their positions.
There's always this undue attention, candidates whose views fall into this quadrant that is socially liberal, which Bradley definitely was, but fiscally conservative, which is Bradley definitely was. The only problem is that's not where the votes are. There are about as many votes up there as there are rich, college-educated folks, which is to say it is a decided minority of the population. But where there are lots of votes is where Al Gore liked to hang out, and by the way, where George W. Bush liked to hang out, which is to say socially moderate to conservative and fiscally liberal.
You know, I think all what matters in campaigns in the end is candidates. I think strategists, consultants, they can make a contribution, sometimes a really important contribution. But at the end of the day, people judge the candidate.
I joined the campaign in November of 1973 when I went to work for his dad.
Chief strategist for George W. Bush, Karl Rove.
So I had been his consultant in the 94 election campaign and the 98 re-election campaign. And you know, I was sort of the mad scientist running around thinking about this. And after the 96 Republican convention, there were a lot of people who started talking to him about it. I think he was initially taken a little bit by surprise, but by the end of the process, after Dole lost, you could tell he was, those kind of conversations were clearly having an impact.
I, George Walker Bush,
do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute the duties.
That I will faithfully execute the duties.
Of the office of governor.
Of office of governor.
Of the state of Texas.
Of the state of Texas.
And will, to the best of my ability.
And will.
There was an intentionality about the way Bush governed in Texas with an eye on that presidential run. Now, you could probably have said the same thing about his brother in Florida, but Bush's time in Texas had been this very intentional governance that was, people in Texas were obviously satisfied enough to return him to office.
It's a modern-day political dynasty. Texas Governor George W. Bush has been reelected in a landslide win. His younger brother, Jeb Bush, will be the new governor of Florida. The older Bush was watching his younger brother's race closely on election night.
It's the second best thing of the evening. I tell you, I love my brother a lot. He's going to be a great governor. I also love my parents a lot. I think tonight's victory is a great testimony to George Bush.
He finally begrudgingly agreed to allow an exploratory committee to be formed, and I think we did it on the 8th of March. And so, you know, we had to raise it $1,000 at a time. And you may remember there's some interesting stories about what happens when we, in June, announce what our number is going to be in a couple of days. They're literally gasped by the press because we raised the unheard of amount of something like, $30-some-odd million. And they were gasped in the room when we said that. But he did not make up his mind until at the end of the legislative session. He began to discuss it with his wife and others, and I'm sure his parents, and made a decision to go. And shortly after that, we began. But he's a very methodical guy. So when he says, I'm not going to make a decision until these things happen, he doesn't make a decision until those things happen.
I'm running because I want our party to match a conservative mind with a compassionate heart. I I want you to know that prosperity is not a given. Some in this current administration think they've invented prosperity. But they didn't invent prosperity any more than they invented the internet.
For the full podcast, go to foxnewspodcast.com.